In today's episode of Locked On Pistons podcast, you're getting part 2 of our conversation with Laz Jackson and Sean Corp. We'll continue talking about different lineups and also where does Jaden Ivey fit in all of this. We'll talk about all of that in today's episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast.
You are Locked On Pistons, your daily Detroit Pistons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's the deal? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast. Per usual, I am your host, Kuka Hill. You can find me over on Twitter at Kuka Hill. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. There's another great way to support the podcast. And now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of an NFL Sunday ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started today. So I'm not going to hear, I'm not here. My goodness, I just fumbled over everything. I'm not here to hold you guys too long. I want to get you guys straight into the second part of our conversation with Laz Jackson and Sean Corp. If you guys haven't listened to part 1, go listen to part 1 first so you know where we left off at and where we're heading into with this episode. But I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I thought it was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun recording with these two guys. A lot of fun conversation. And specifically the end of today's episode of part 2 might be the darkest. It might be the darkest ending to a Locked On Pistons podcast in a funny way. Well, it's a sad way, but also a funny way that I've ever recorded a podcast ending to. Like, I couldn't believe Sean went. I couldn't believe Sean went here. So stay tuned for that. But I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. I'll catch you guys there. Stay safe out there. Enjoy today's episode. Peace out.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I'm at, but I'm kind of waffling between, is it Simone on the floor, or does Beasley become such a high volume, reliable 3-point shooter that they go with Thompson on the floor as like in that starting lineup and see if it can work? Because really, I mean, it is, again, with Thompson, it is all about building an offense around him that allows you to utilize his defense. Is it possible? At the same time, I think to Ku's point, you really want to unlock his skill and develop him as more of a ball handler. Does that mean you want him on the floor with lower leverage situations, but more responsibility? Yeah. And I consider this team to be without a backup point guard. So like, if you really want to unlock Asar, maybe you do that in a very important reserve role where he's splitting time with Jaden Ivey, with that primary ball handling and creation responsibility. And maybe that's the best way to get him to take a step from year 1 to year 2 and then really maximize things in year 3.
Yeah, I definitely agree that if Asar is going to play more of like a primary, secondary ball handler role, it's better for him to do that in bench lineups or against other bench lineups. That's probably you're setting him up for success a little bit more if you do that than if you put him in against other NBA starters and tell him to go do that.
So my concern, and I don't want to turn this in completely on an Asar topic and like turn into an Asar
like he's
episode.
kind of the swing guy,
he
right?
Deserves
like,
it. He's
okay, so we agree that he's the X factor. Do we agree?
Yeah.
We all agree with that?
Yeah, it was like they're not going to start. Well, I don't know if they're going to start Stewart or not, but it seems pretty clear that like Jalen Duren is the incumbent big man starter, and like I don't think they're going to bench Cade. So like Asar, whether or not Asar can be on the floor with the other two guys is the question.
So like my thing is like with what you said, Laz, about how he was used as like a kind of like as a roll man and like used in screen and roll. I don't think they used him much in DHO, but kind of the same thing, get him flowing towards the basket, that kind of thing. I think it was the best. I agree that it was the best way to use him last year because the other options of what Monty was doing was so bad. Like Monty's other option was just playing him in the corner, and it was just like sabotaging everything.
Yeah.
And Houston, I think, I don't want to make them the exact same player, but they have similar skills, like very similar. And like Houston, Houston's kind of doing the same thing with his brother, where it's like, okay, they envision him as a future primary playmaker, But like as of right now, their best way of utilizing it, they were like putting him in the dunker spot, and they were just having to roll to the rim. And he was just as good as Asar, like at rebounding and finishing around. Like they're great athletes like that, to where like they had the same idea. My concern is like I don't want that to be like what you want him to become. Like you don't want that to be what he is. Like you want to be that. You want that to be what you're using him in the meantime, because you don't trust him maybe to do the other part yet, or simply because you're Monty Williams and you're saying, well, I don't know how else to use him. This is the only other way I can think of. And it's like, okay, well, we'll take that over like sitting in the corner. Just like I agree with what Sean was kind of saying. I just think that the ball handling has to be unlocked, because like I said, pre-draft, my thing was if you don't believe in that being what he is, you cannot take him at 5, because I don't think he's I don't think he's a top 5 prospect then if you don't believe in that.
Yeah.
Well, the person that took him at 5 is unemployed, so
well,
he's employed. He's just not employed.
That's right.
Well, yeah, in Washington,
Yeah.
He's gathering the former Piston Avengers. I don't know how many more I know he got one. I don't know if he'd actually gotten others after that. But what was I?
I mean, I think it's important to think about, with his brother in Houston, he shined in a bench role where he could utilize his talents, but not have too much on his plate and not be put in disadvantageous situations. I think the lesson learned from what Houston did is that they added talent that allowed their young players to progress their skills more organically and not be frustrated by failure. And the Pistons have been very frustrated by failure with all these young guys, and the fans are frustrated too. And everybody wants to blow it up when really they just need to be lower on the priority list of, you can't have your 5 best players on your team be 21-year-olds. That's what Detroit tried to do. That's why they failed miserably. Houston is not taking that pathway. They are saying, we're going to keep all our 21-year-olds for the most part, the most important ones. They have more than they can use, frankly, still, but they have other players, more veteran players that they use in their starting lineup with more natural skills, and they saw a lot more success, and so did their young players in lesser roles.
Yeah, I think so. I agree with you that if you're only going to use Asar as like this like weird non-shooting big type of role, if you're treating Asar like he's Draymond on offense for the most part, then like, yeah, that's probably not the best use of him. But the thing I'll say is that like leveraging him, giving him more ball handling duties, that's very much to me like a February, March, April thing, not a October, November, December thing, right? When you have hit the 30 loss mark already and you're, not necessarily like in the process of tanking, you still want to be competitive, but you also want to see what you've got. When you're in the more of the experimentation phase of the season, then like, yeah, absolutely, like let Asar like go crazy with the ball handling reps and just like see what happens. But as you start the season, as you try to build momentum, get fans, to Sean's point, a little bit less frustrated about things, is like use him what he's good at, right? And Houston, to use the Houston example, right? Houston won like 41 games last year, right? And so I doubt they would have won that many games if they had benched Fred VanVleet and told Amen like, hey, like you're our starting point guard, right? And so it's that there's that push and pull of like development versus like on-court success. And at the early part of this season, with a brand new coaching staff, with a brand new front office regime, I personally think the slider is going to be more towards like on-court success for this team to start the season.
You've heard us talk about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you now. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. All my NFL fans out there, all my football fans out there know just how big of a deal that is. Then with YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. Along with this, I've told you guys many times, a few years ago, I tried out FanDuel, and I have not turned back since. It's super self-explanatory, super easy to use, but most importantly, super fun to use as well, along with this incredible deal to get a 3-week free trial NFL Sunday ticket. FanDuel is for you. Just visit FanDuel.com. Download America's #1 sportsbook today. That's at FanDuel.com. So we have to talk about Jaden Ivey before we wrap up.
Yeah, I was gonna say none of us put Jaden Ivey in our starting lineups, and we should probably talk about that a little.
Yeah, we have to talk about Jaden Ivey before we wrap up. However, I have to ask this one question real quick because Jack brought this up to me, Jack Kelly, on one of our podcasts. Like, I think it was last week or Monday. No, last week. I think it was last Friday. Either way, definitely go check that out if you guys haven't already. But Jack brought up, me and him were kind of talking that, do we believe? I want to ask you guys just quickly, and then we can talk about Ivy. You guys kind of brought up like the Sean. You kind of brought up how they need to be lower in the pecking order, and like there needs to be no like amount of. You didn't say no amount, but kind of like the blow up everything and trade everyone. It doesn't need to be that. They can just like lower on the priority list. Jack brought this question up to me, and something I've been like kicking around. I just haven't really said it. I mean, I've said it publicly a few times, but we haven't really dove into it. Do you think that if Cade, I think a lot of the reason why it's like that, I think they have to the deadline to find out who's going to stay. I think at the deadline, they're going to make some decisions. That's what I believe is going to happen. But do you believe it would be that way if Cade struggled last year? Like essentially, since what I'm saying is like since Cade thrived how he did last year, despite the circumstances, like the fact that Cade showed, hey, I'm ready for us to actually have a good team. Like I can lead us somewhere. Like I can help us get somewhere. The fact that he showed that in such a bad situation, do you think that puts that level of, okay, like we just signed into this rookie max. He just showed us that like he's ready. Like he can do something. We have to like put something around him. Like rather than if he also struggled last year, they would have a level of, okay, we can be a little bit more patient because even he's not ready. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, does it seem like since Cade seems more ready right now to like take the next step, at least to me, I think that's how people read it, that it kind of gives that sense of, okay, we kind of need to have a little sense of urgency here to put something around him to like thrive and like potentially take them somewhere. Or like, and when I say somewhere, I don't mean like let's be like, we know what I'm talking, like not superstar, like the championship, but like play-in contention, like play-in stuff like that.
To me, it's less of like we have to be good now because he showed he is ready for it. It's more he showed so much obvious talent in the worst situation in the league that let's not overthink it. Let's put a basic modern NBA offense around him and really see what we have, because the answer is going to be obvious, because he's at least he's good enough to show us, because he practically showed us when he's playing with Killian Hayes, Asar Thompson, and Isaiah Stewart, around him with, Isaiah Livers for good measure. So like, I think it was more about, okay, we're going to sign him to this extension. He deserves it. We're not going to regret that investment. Now let's see what we really have, because once we see what a maximized Cade looks like, we can see what really works around him best. And, to take a step back and to make this a bit more of a Jaden Ivey discussion point, I really feel like Cade got absolved of all blame for all of the team's lineup problems last year, and Jaden Ivey got all of the blame, more than he deserved. He struggled. He is not like an optimal player alongside Cade, at least in his second year form, but like, he is better than what the blame he got for the Pistons struggles last year. And I will just be glad that the Pistons not only can have a lineup that can better support Cade, but better support Jaden Ivey playing alongside in a more natural role, whether that's alongside Cade or not, just because the other pieces are going to fit much more organically and logically around both of them.
Go ahead.
The thing I'll say is that if Cade struggled last year, I don't know if he would have gotten the extension. And to me, the extension is the inciting factor, because once you pay a guy that much money, like you don't pay a guy that much money to lose. right? We're seeing that in like Chicago right now, right? With like Zach LaVine, like as they transition from one stage of building to another, they're like, hey, like we got to do something with this guy because we're paying him too much money to lose. And so I think that if Cade had struggled last year, he wouldn't have gotten the extension, and like we would be having some different conversations. But there also like would not be as much of I don't think there would be as much of a focus on like winning or developing him in particular this season. I think if he had struggled, it would be a lot more like, all right, like just Monty was just a really bad coach. Like we got a brand new coach in here. So it's like Cade struggled, Ivy struggled. Like let's figure this whole thing out, as opposed to like where we are kind of now, which is like, all right, like Cade got better as the season got on. We feel good about him. We're gonna shift things towards him. We're gonna pay him in excess of $200 million. And Jaden Ivey is still kind of a question mark, right?
All right, so we can move on to Jaden Ivey. He's like the obvious like elephant in the room. I think my listeners very clearly know where I stand on him. I don't. Do you guys have a sense of where I am on Ivey, or
a little bit?
So, all right. So I'll just give real quickly. I want to hear from you guys on Ivey in general, and why you guys left him out of the starting lineup. We all left him out, by the way. It wasn't just me. Everyone listening. So you can't sit here and yell at me no more. Go yell at Laz. Go yell at Sean. Like their Twitter is Sean Corp, Laz_Jack. Like go yell at them. Don't just sit here and yell at me. but so this is where I'm at. This is why I'll go ahead and say it. I'll admit it. I'm basically out on Jaden Ivey. Like I don't have much belief in him being good in 2024. Like if you tell me he'll be good in 2027, I can believe that. In 2020, like if you can tell in a few years he'll be good, I can believe that future. I've moved to a point where I'm pretty much out on him being good this year and soon for these reasons. And then you guys can go with why. You guys don't have to join me on that. You guys can just talk about why you guys have a lot to line up.
Yeah, I think Sean has a more kinder position, so I want him to go first. In contrast,
okay. So I'm out on Ivy because of this reason, these reasons only. I mean, it's just straightforward. He's an athletic guy. He's an athletic guard, very quick, an instant paint touch that can't make anything out of the paint touch he gets. He's not a good finisher. He was in the 24th percentile as a finisher this past year. His first year, I believe he was in the 9th percentile. So he's not been a good finisher through 2 years. This past year, he was in the 14th percentile as a spot-up shooter, one of the worst in the league. There was a tweet that I saved, I have bookmarked, that look, in February, he had that hot streak, and everyone got fooled and tried saying that he's been shooting good through the whole year. That was not the case. There was a tweet by someone with NBA.com. I forget who it was. Like mid-January, they were posting like the worst open catch-and-shoot three-point shooters in the league, and he was the worst one in the league leading up to February. Now, he shot like 50% in February, so I like changed his numbers a little. I forget how. Like February, he shot the stripes off the ball, so like kind of elevated his numbers a little bit. But he's not a good shooter. His in-between game got worse from what it was at the end of his rookie season. At the end of his rookie season, he improved, and he looked worse. And you can kind of blame some of that on Monty, I guess. He's not a good finisher. He's not a good shooter. He's a bad defender. And when he's also an erratic decision maker. So people talk about why does Cade have the ball in his hands so much? It's like, okay, like I guess I'll end it with this. Like Monty, the big thing with Monty was you're playing Killian instead of him. That was the big thing. But like I talked with Bryce a little bit about this. I mean, that's what it was. It mostly was it's Killian Hayes you're playing instead of him. And I was a Killian guy, obviously. So, but like that was the big issue. But when Ivy would play, like it wasn't like that you were sitting there saying, "Oh, I can't see why Monty doesn't like Ivy." Like that was okay, he's not defending, he's not finishing well, he's turned the ball over, he's not making the right reads. You saw teammates get frustrated with him. I'm not going to say specific names because I don't want to get hunted down, but there was just players that got frustrated. Like you can see, I can understand why Monty wasn't a fan of him. It just you shouldn't have been such a bad fan of him that you're playing Killian Hayes like 30 minutes more than him. That was the pushback. But that's why I'm on Ivy. I think in order for him to be a good player, he had to improve all that, and I can't see him doing that in one season, in one off season. Like as a finisher, as a shooter, decision maker, as a ball handler, as a defender. And even if he does improve as a shooter, like, okay, at that point, I still have questions on, okay, is he still the best fit next to Cade? Like, a guy is not a good defender. You can't kind of erratic as a decision maker. Is he still like that best fit? So that overall is why I'll go ahead and say it out loud. Like, yeah, I'm more so out on Ivy. I'm happy to be wrong, but like as of where I'm at right now, I'm kind of out on him.
So I think I probably definitely have the highest opinion of Ivy among this trio. Not saying that most of what you said was wrong, but I'm certainly not out because there was enough I saw in progression of skill from his rookie season to his sophomore season that I was saying, okay, he knows what he needs to get better at. He's showing the right things. And then team context got in the way, coaching got in the way. He battled through it for a stretch of the season. And then basically in the latter third of the year, everything imploded. And it was doubly frustrating because it was when Ivy was one of the lone healthy bodies that mattered, that was still on the floor. It was prime opportunity for him to basically cement his status as a future member of the team. And he biffed it, or just everything else was too much and he couldn't take advantage of it. And that was really frustrating. I would say long term, I'm most concerned about the lack of defense because you can't build a very high level, highly paid backcourt of the future that has championship aspirations if both players can't perform very good on both ends of the floor. Like, I just don't want to make that investment in a long-term guard alongside Cade that's not a high-level defender. So he's going to have to learn how to be at least a decent defender for me to really think about him as a long-term piece. But, like, if you look at his numbers through January, he was shooting 64% in the restricted area. He was getting better. He was learning how to use his body and absorb contact, use the contact to create space, finish a little better at the rim. And then it just all fell apart. I think that's the only thing people remember is that last third when literally he couldn't do anything right. And, that was sad, bad, putrid basketball. I can't absolve him of that, but we were seeing him perform admirably, I thought, in really bad context with a coach that didn't believe him. And he was carving out in the narrow spaces that he was allowed to operate, both within like literal physical space, but then also sort of metaphysical. Nobody cares about what I do in this offense seemingly, but I'm still going to do it. Like, he was performing at a decent level. So I think with a coach that believes in him, with better shooting around him, with better defenders around him, with a team context that made sense, we could actually see Jaden Ivey develop and progress to what we wanted to see last year and see it this year. Last year was a lost year for basically everybody.
Yeah, I'm closer to Koo than Sean, but I think that in order to get value out of Jaden Ivey, the asset, you have to rehabilitate him to a point where you can trade him for like something. If that's what you want to plan on doing is trading him. I gave this spiel on the Hardwood Knocks podcast already, but my main thing is just that at a base level, Jaden Ivey really needs the ball in his hands to do all the things that he's good at. And even when he does the things that he's good at, he's not as good as Cade Cunningham. And so there's no reason to put the ball in his hands over Cade. Like, they can share, like he can be a second side guy, but we've seen that role does not take full advantage of all of Jaden Ivey's gifts. And so with that in mind, I think a mutual parting of ways, a divorce, is probably what's best for both the Detroit Pistons and Jaden Ivey. That does not mean I think Jaden Ivey sucks. That does not mean I can't clearly see the talent that Jaden Ivey has. It might just be a thing where, three coaches in 3 years, 3 offensive coordinators in 3 years. Like, it wasn't going to happen for him here. Maybe it will happen someplace else. There are plenty of NBA stories that go that way, right? But yeah, the lack of defense is again like a big sticking point. the inability to hit spot up shots is a big sticking point. And Ku, you brought up something that I think gets passed up a lot too, was like the lack of an in-between game. It's either threes or the rim or nothing. And I think you want a little bit more versatility offensively, a little bit more flexibility offensively, especially from a guy who you're going to be. I don't, if he's a very high pick. I don't know what kind of extension he would want to sign, but like guys who get drafted that high don't get Simone Fontecchio extensions, right?
So you don't want to give him the Patrick Williams money?
Man, that is actually like more reasonable.
I'll say no. I'm out on giving
like
him Patrick Williams money.
I'm out. I'm like no, but as the cap goes up, like that deal's not gonna look terrible.
The only thing I want to push back on a little bit, Laz, is speed alongside Cade Cunningham, I think, is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why Jaden Ivey was drafted. You want an athlete playing alongside Cade, I think, because you want to be able to give defenses different looks. And you want Cade to be able to orchestrate that. And Cade can orchestrate without the ball in his hands. He can set up the offense. He can work with Jaden Ivey. I think they have a good enough relationship to where, they know how to play to each other's strengths, just not when Killian Hayes sharing the floor as well. So
I
think
I agree that
there
like,
is a world where I think it makes sense. I know why they drafted him, and I think there is still a way they could work together.
Yeah.
I have more faith in Jaden Ivey developing a better finishing shot and a better 3-point shot than I do Jaden Ivey developing high-level defense. And, frankly, the last thing on that list is the most important to me. So, what do I think long-term? We'll see. But like offensively, I still think there's a lot more that can be developed.
Yeah. I'm really curious to see how I presume he's going to be leveraged as like the de facto backup point guard. And I'm really curious to see how he performs in that role, because I think that like not backup point guard, but like, again, guy with the ball in his hands is his best role. And so if a good role for Jaden Ivey ends up being like, hey, Jaden, go slaughter these bench lineups because nobody can stay in front of you. Like, I think that's a perfectly like fine use of his talents for this team for this season.
So like the other thing with Ivy is this: a lot of people, and I'm not saying it doesn't have any level of like reality to it, but a lot of people just kind of push his season to the side because of Monty. This is my pushback to that. I personally think his best part of the season was like the first 15 games of the year. Like I recorded a podcast with Locked On Fantasy host, Fantasy Basketball, my goodness, Josh Lloyd. The first like 15 games of the season, he was shooting like 72% at the rim. So like he wasn't getting a lot of minutes, but in the limited amount of minutes he played, he was being incredibly efficient. I think he had like what was his? I don't have his true shooting in front of me, but I know he shot around like 70% at the rim in those first 15 games. And then after that, it just crashed. Like, so, and that was the time where he wasn't being played as much. That was when Killian was being played over him. And then when Monty played him more, that's when he started playing worse. So like, that's when you can I'm not absolving Monty at all. Monty was like awful. So like, I'm not absolving that. It's just that I don't necessarily agree that, okay, he had bad seasons because of Monty, where I feel like he had the best part of his season when Monty had him coming off the bench. And then when Monty started using him more, he started getting worse. So that's like why I push back against that idea a bit.
Yeah. The way I've been thinking about it is like maybe his NBA destiny is like Malik Monk, right? It was just high level offense mainly, but like exciting and good player who you don't really want to have your team rely upon, right? Like good addition, you want him on your team, but like you don't want him to be like the guy. And because he was drafted so highly, like Monk was, it's like it's still, and until he gets off this rookie contract, it will be a question of like, can he be the guy? And then, once he gets paid like not the guy, like it becomes pretty clear.
So like my question, and we'll wrap up the podcast here because we're nearing an hour and I don't want to hold you guys all night. And for everyone listening, I'm going to try to get this episode out the same night we're recording, and it's already 10 o'clock. So I'm gonna be working double time to get it out for you guys. But I just want to ask you guys this, and I'm interested to hear what you had to say last, but I'm really interested to hear Sean's too, because you're higher on Ivy. One of the main pushbacks against me, and I get it, is that he's an instant paint touch. That you can't stop him from getting to the paint, and simply having somebody who can collapse the defense is valuable. My pushback, I just want to know if you guys agree, disagree, where you guys stand with this point. My point is he's an instant paint touch, sure, but if you're not getting anything out of that paint touch, what's the point of it? Like, I'd rather have someone who can do other things. Like, yeah, he can get to the paint, but I don't trust him as a playmaker. I think he's erratic with the ball in his hand. So when he gets to the rim, either tough finishes that he's not finishing, or erratic passes that are turnovers or off target. Like the heater passes that he throws, like the Stafford passes where he's just like lasering it at somebody 2 feet away from him in the dunker spot. Like, that's really frustrating for me, but that's just like one part. Just want to throw that out there. But like, if you're not creating anything out of the paint touch, it's basically not viable at all to me. Do you guys agree, disagree? Where do you guys stand on that philosophy?
I mean, I think that's true, but I think I also credit Ivy more for his, slow development inside before it all fell away. I saw things early in the season, and then I saw sporadically learning how to use his speed that I thought was very intriguing, learning how to absorb contact and still contort his body to finish at a higher level than he did his rookie season. I thought, he was not top of the league, but I think he showed advances, and with his natural speed that is not going to leave him, those advances could point, if he makes the same jump from year 1 to year 2 and then year 2 to year 3, then we're really talking about somebody that can be an inside scoring presence and finisher in a way that you can really capitalize his athleticism. So I have not sort of abandoned hope as far as him being an elite inside player. I mean, so I looked up real quick just his first 28 games. He had a 56 true shooting percentage. That's above league average, I think, still at this point. And it's obviously not because of his 3-point shooting. I don't have his inside numbers, but like I said before, I think through the January, he had 64%. If you get that up to 70%, in year 3 in a better team context, I think then you're talking about a Jaden Ivey who is useful. So I still believe in the general premise that he's not great, but he got better from year 1 to year 2. And I think he can get a lot better from year 2 to year 3. So I think that's still something you can utilize.
Yeah, I don't want to completely discard the potential of Jaden Ivey. I just want to see how he performs in a smaller but still significant role for this team this season.
Well, I know that everyone listening is like, "Cool, you gotta stop hating on Ivy." And I've accepted the Ivy hating label. I don't feel like I feel like I'm just bringing reality to the situation. Yeah. That's what I feel like I'm doing, but I'll accept the hater label. I mean, it is what it is.
Well, I'll tell you where I think you're exactly right, and what scares me most about year 3 is that I hate Jaden Ivey as a point guard, and rifling passes is the thing that makes me lose my hair faster than I already am. And I think I'm going to see a lot more of it this year than I did last year, because this team doesn't have a point guard on the bench and they want to play Ivy. So,
I mean, I'll simply say it again. I've said it on the podcast multiple times. There's multiple backup point guard options on the free agency market that I'd be fine with over Ivy as a backup point guard. And I also think, like you said, Sean, I think Ivy would be better as an off guard than someone you want running your offense. But I mean, we'll see what happens. We'll see how it goes. Yeah. You guys have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Nah, man, I'm good.
I'll say I think people are discounting how much more watchable this team is going to be, because they don't even really understand how unwatchable it was last year. Like, you all think you know how bad it was, but it's going to be in stark contrast to what this team is this year. And you're like, oh, this wasn't hard to build at all. Like, this is all it took.
So just like a funny story to wrap up on with that. It's like a few weeks ago, I was in an Xbox party with all my friends, and we were just like, chopping it up. And one of the discussions that got thrown out there was like, if you throw prime LeBron on any team, do you think they would become a contender? And initially I was on the side like, yeah, if you take prime LeBron, throw him on any team, they will be at least a contender. And then one of my friends, he's from Chicago. He says to me, he's like, you guys won 60. You guys lost 68 games last year. You think prime LeBron's taking that? And I kid you not, I sat there like, this is coming from someone who covered every game, had a podcast every single day, had to go to the games. He said it. I was quiet for him. I'm like, damn, they lost 68 games for real. I low-key forgot like 60. I low-key forgot just how bad it truly was. And it was just like we were all started laughing. I was like, man, I for real forgot 68 games out of 82. That's a lot. I just did. You low-key forget, even after living it, you low-key just don't you forget the feeling of that losing streak, low-key. That losing streak was next level, they were a global embarrassment at that point. It was bad. But I just wanted to wrap up on that. That was, since you brought it up, Sean, that was a funny story I bring up. It's just, I agree. I don't think people, even Pistons fans, even myself, I don't think we truly remember just how bad it got last year at certain points. But
it's like when you have a pet that's getting older and you do so much to nurture it and protect it and give it medicine and take it to the vet, and you do the expensive procedures and you get everything checked out, and then they pass away and you're like, what the hell have I been doing for the last year? I never would have guessed I did all that. That was us supporting the Pistons. A sick dog that needed to get put down long ago.
That might be, Sean, that might be the darkest end to any Locked On.
You know I've been covering this team for over 10 years.
That might be the darkest end to any podcast I've recorded.
I got nothing. Cut the tape.
All right, I'll catch you guys later. Thank you guys for coming on, man. You guys can go follow Laz and Sean over on Twitter. I appreciate you guys for coming on. This was a lot of fun. We'll chop this up into 2 episodes. Hope you guys enjoy it. I appreciate you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen every single day. Free and available on all your podcast platforms. Hit that subscribe button to the YouTube channel. Leave us a 5-star review, whatever podcast platform you're listening to us on. And until next time, I'll see you guys later. Stay safe out there. Till next time, peace out.